Well, I'm very pleased to introduce Kara Johnson. This is Johnson Month at BoulderNet. We have Shelley Johnson presenting on May 18th. Kara, and so it's pronounced Kara because she cares, right? She came to us through a recommendation by Carrie Penske, who's a highly respected career coach in this area up in at Fort Collins, and she's presented to BoulderNet in the past. Kara has a business called Untamed Life Career Coaching and Life Design. Life design sounds like a wonderful thing. Kara helps people forge their own paths and design careers and lives that are authentically theirs. And she seemed like a very nice person. I'll put a link to her website in the chat. Kara, over to you.
Thanks, Don. Hi, everybody. Like Don said, my name's Kara, and just a quick little kind of introduction about me. So I spent a good portion of my career working at Colorado State University as a career counselor, and recently transitioned into doing career coaching and life design for myself. So it's been a little over a year since I transitioned out of higher education, and a bit about that is, I just kind of got to a point where I was feeling burnout and like I wasn't in charge of my own time or priorities, and wanted to be living a life that was more authentic to me and what I wanted to get out of it. So that's kind of how I ended up here. And so I'm slowly but surely getting out here more and talking to some groups, talking to some people. And so that's why I'm here today. So I really thank Dawn for inviting me, and Carrie, who obviously is not here, but who recommended that. But yeah, so that's kind of my whole spiel is authenticity, because I think that's a really important part of just living, but in a job search especially. So that's why I decided to talk around that today. So I'm going to share a worksheet in the chat. You all are welcome to use it or not, but it's just something that could be helpful along the way as we're going. So I'm just going to put that in the chat for you all. We won't be getting to it until a little bit later, but just wanted to put that in there. So I'm going to share my screen here. Can everyone see the presentation?
Yes.
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 And everyone can hear me okay? It's all good?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So, and something else to kind of know about me and just my presentation style is I like things to be interactive and conversational. So I will probably be posing quite a few questions to you all. So I love it when people engage and interact, because I feel like you get more out of things when that happens. So please don't feel like you're interrupting me. Like if I ask questions, please just, shout it out. I can't really see everybody if you raise your hand. So just feel free to unmute and comment or respond to questions that I'm asking. I will not be offended. I really like that. So yeah, just wanted to put that out there. So this group obviously is a networking group, which is wonderful. But I think sometimes, and I'm curious what you all just kind of initial reactions to the words up on the screen. So just personal branding, self-promotion, networking, elevator pitch. What kind of initial gut reactions or feelings or emotions do those words bring up for you all?
I'm super comfortable doing this for any other company or person, not necessarily myself.
Yep.
I think it's your opportunity in a very short amount of time to tell somebody about yourself from a professional standpoint.
And how do you feel about that? Does that feel comfortable to you?
It depends. 6 months ago, no. Today, a little bit better, right? As you practice, that's why we attend these networking meetings. And BoulderNet gives you the opportunity to practice in a safe environment, right? You feel okay, right? We're all friends. So every time you practice, you get a little bit better.
That's great.
Sharon, I think that's a great point. I went through this one other time back in New York, and it was so daunting the first time around, but I found I took a lot of notes and I wrote down my brand and I shortened my elevator pitch to something really targeted, because you want to tell them all about the great things that you've done, but you don't have that time. So how do you capture them from the very beginning? So I do think if it's your first time, I give you a lot of encouragement. It's very scary, and it's scary the second time too, but like, it's not as bad the second time.
Yeah, I think that's important to acknowledge, and everybody's at different phases in their journey, right? So I think that's important to acknowledge. Some people, this might be their first time here or coming to something like this, or some people might be coming for years, and we have different personality styles too, right? Like, I don't know if anyone else is an introvert, but I would classify myself as more introverted. So these types of things can be really difficult for people. So I think it's just important to acknowledge that. And I think this is great that everyone's so supportive. Anyone else want to share just like gut initial reactions to some of these words?
I'm wondering like how you, well, not I'm wondering, I think that it's like you've got to tailor your pitch to each person so that you sound authentic. And like when you're giving it, and not like you're giving a canned speech, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, and hopefully as we talk through this, we'll talk through some things that will be helpful for that. Yeah,
I was just thinking the same thing that Christina just said. It's kind of like your resume. You need to tailor it just a bit towards each person, different position, like what you want to bring up about yourself. So.
Anybody else? Is their gut reaction to some of these phrases this kind of thing? I will. Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, well, yeah, because initially everybody goes, oh my God, I have to talk about myself. I don't want to do that. People don't want to know about me. Why would they want to know?
Yeah. Who am I? Right. Or like, does anyone just get these like, I think a lot of these words have negative connotations with them. So what are some of those like negative associations some of these words might have with them?
Yeah, for me, it reminds, no offense to anybody who's in marketing, but my experience with marketing is creating a perception, and sometimes it works around the edges. So the word branding kind of has that connotation to me a little bit. It can tend to be not completely authentic in my perception.
I think it also feels a little bit like, and not that this is a bad thing and we should do it more, but tooting our own horn, like we're being egotistical, or, like, wow, they have a big ego. And in this case, you do need to have a bit of an ego and talk about why you are good at what you do so that you can get the job. But it just feels like, like, oh my gosh, they're gonna think I'm full of myself.
Yeah. Does anyone have a hard time talking about themselves? Promoting themselves? I think sometimes.
I actually think it's really important to be clear about our own personal branding, because that really speaks for who we are, right? Because in whatever situation, either at a job interview or an elevator pitch or networking, when we can be clear about our personal branding, that's basically who we are, what value we bring. So I actually worked with a coach to hone my personal branding, and I'm very comfortable about speaking about it as only 3 sentences.
Great. Yeah, I think clarity is really important. So, yeah, I think it's a lot of times we do have a tendency to associate some of these terms with, the arrogance, the bragging. Oh, it's all about me and how awesome I am, or the sleazy like sales. We picture this like used cars salesman and like, ooh, I got to be like that in order to, promote myself. And it's phony or fake. I think those are some of the associations we might have. I mean, not saying that that's accurate, but I think if we have those feelings about it, then it's going to be a lot harder for us to communicate our brand authentically, because we think of these things as kind of those negative associations that we have with them. So yeah, great. Any other thoughts or comments on around that? So really personal branding, if done right and properly, right, it should be self-confident and intentional and clear, like you were saying, June. And it's a way to communicate your value. That's exactly what it should be, right? Not like putting out some facade that you think other people want to see, but it really should be about your presenting your authentic self. So I think, when we can get there and kind of realize like, oh, okay, personal branding doesn't have to be this fake, facade, nor should it be, then I think it takes some of the pressure off and we can feel like, oh, okay, like it's really just about being myself and putting myself out there for the world to see. So that's one of my goals for today, was to kind of challenge some of those perceptions we might have around some of these words and phrases and get more comfortable with maybe doing it and looking at it a different way than we might have looked at it in the past. Okay, so I want to do a little bit of just a quiz, just for fun, just to see if you can recognize some of these personal brands by a description. So this first one, I'll just give you a second to read it, and then feel free to just shout it out, your guess on who this is. Any guesses? Nobody?
It's in the chat.
Oh, it's in the chat. Okay, I can't see the chat.
Somebody said Madonna.
How about Beyonce?
Beyonce, that's right. Yeah. All right. This next one might be a little tougher. And I can't easily see the chat, so if other people can see that or read it or want to shout it out, that's great.
Time Warner.
What was that? Anything in the
Richard
chat?
Branson?
Nope.
No.
Mark Cuban?
Nope. Good guesses though. Anyone familiar with Gary Vee?
No.
So he's pretty popular in terms of like he's out there on social media a lot. If you're not familiar with him, you might check him out. He's a pretty interesting guy. But yeah, those guesses, Mark Cuban, Richard Branson, good guesses, very kind of similar sort of vein. All right, what about this last one?
Martha Stewart.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Those
So
Nikes.
yeah, good job. Good job, everybody. So the point of this is not to be like, okay, we all need to go out and be Beyonce or Martha Stewart, right? Well, and actually we shouldn't try and be that because we can only be ourselves. We can't be somebody else. But it's more around like why personal branding matters. So do you all have brands that you're loyal to? Just shout some out, or just why you're loyal to certain brands.
Hunt's Tomatoes.
Okay, what is it about Hunt's Tomatoes?
Well, if it's true what they say, they process the tomatoes with steam, not chemicals.
Yeah, and that's a reason. So that kind of aligns with your values, right?
Nike, it's a brand that I've had since I was in high school, straight through. It's consistency, it's quality, it's performance. So it's everything that I would want in a brand.
Right. Yeah. Like, why you buy Nikes, right?
Fit, everything.
Yep. Other ones.
iPhone.
Okay. Why?
I'm familiar with the technology, so I'm repeating my purchase. My learning curve is less. My photos are all there.
Hmm.
Got me hooked.
Any other ones?
I've been shopping at Trader Joe's a lot. And I have to say, it's obviously it's a brand I use a lot.
And what is it about Trader Joe's that you like?
They have supposedly organic food and it's a smaller store, so I'm not overwhelmed when I go in there.
Great.
I would have to say my MacBook Pro, and I tell people it's like running your fingers over butter when using a MacBook Pro as opposed to any other PC.
Yeah. So you all seem to be very familiar with, and you're able to kind of rattle it off, like, here's some brands that I'm loyal to and why, like, this is why I like the brand. And that's essentially what you're going for with your own branding, right? Because people like to engage with and work with people they know, they like, and they trust, right? So you all have probably heard that, know, like, and trust. And people often choose one brand over another, not because of objective reasons, but because of more subjective ones. So they, they like you, they relate to you, they see themselves in you. And that's kind of, with products too. So again, that's what you're going for is, relating to people and helping them get a sense of who you are and how you align with them. Because just as a company's brand helps them communicate its value to customers and stand out from the competition, your personal brand does the same exact thing for you. So if you're not clear on that, then it's going to be really hard, to target the types of roles or companies or organizations that you're interested in if you're not really clear on who you are or what you're looking for. So how does some of this stuff affect the job search process, or how have you seen it affect a job search process, or if you're applying to like graduate school or even getting a promotion? Why does this matter?
So Kara, one of the things that I think a few of us can relate to, when you first start a job search, you've left some position that you felt comfortable in. Now you're out there and the world's at your door, the world's out there for you, but it's narrowing that down because you can't look at everything. So you got to narrow it down to maybe like the top 3, max 5. And so your personal branding, the whole thing, you got to say, well, yeah, I can do all these things, but what's my focus?
Yeah, because you can't be everything to everyone, right? So it is having to decide that, absolutely, instead of trying to be everything to everybody. But it's like, and we give employers a lot of power in terms of this process, right? It's like, oh, how do I fit in here, and how can I be the right match for the employer? And sometimes we can forget about like, well, what do I want, and like, what's important to me? How do I want to show up? What kind of environment is going to be best for me? So I think remembering that as part of the equation. I think some of you touched on this a little bit earlier, but how many of you feel like crystal clear on your brand and are able to communicate it effectively? I can't really see everybody, but yeah, I think it's one of those things where, some of you might be in a place where, like June, it sounds like you might be in a place where you're pretty comfortable with what your brand is. And, some of you might be like, this is the first time I'm even hearing about a brand. I don't get why it's important, let alone how I would communicate it, right? So, and that's okay, like wherever you are, but I think just having an awareness is a good starting point.
Well, I
So
think at the end of the day, like if you're in an interview, your one of your goals is to educate them on how you bring value. So your personal brand is, so I'm project management, and there's a few of us, right? Jill's project management. I heard that several times on this call. And at the end of the day, what are you trying to do? You're trying to get something done. For me, my personal brand at the end of the day is I get the job done. It's very succinct.
Sharon, you cut out there.
Yeah, Sharon, I think you cut out.
But yeah, absolutely. I think, and it's one of those things, right? If you're not sure how to communicate your brand, how can we expect hiring managers or admissions committees or our boss to understand that, right? We need to know those things. We need to know how to communicate our value, because other people aren't just going to readily recognize that, right? So that's why it's important for us to understand it.
Kara?
Yeah.
Can I ask you a question on that? One of the things that I get tripped up with a lot, and I think several other people have mentioned it, is, you know, I don't want to be so narrow that somebody can just write me off. No, you don't fit. So I wonder if it makes sense to have a couple of alternative brands to fit in, depending on, you know, what the opportunity or what the situation is.
You know, I think that could be true, as long as it's true for you, right? As long as it's not like trying to fit into a box because we think that's the box we need to fit into, because in the long term, is that really going to be a good fit anyway? Because if you're kind of trying to like make yourself a chameleon and mold into like, I need to be this to fit in here, maybe that's not the place you want to be. But, you know, to an extent, right? Of course, yes, you still need to be able to articulate things in a way where it translates, you know, especially if you're like a career changer and, you know, you were in one field and going into another field, it's important to be able to translate that vocabulary. So, but yeah, I think as long as it's authentic for you, just having kind of like those go-to like skills and values and interests that you can just kind of say, yeah, okay, like being able to recognize and edit in the moment, like, oh, this is what might make most sense to talk about with this particular person, right? Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think that's why it's, you know, not being so rigid, because you don't want to have this like canned response, right? Especially with like an elevator pitch, where it's like, oh, it's just super rigid and I have it like memorized. Like that is not what you want anyway. Like you want it to be kind of naturally flow. Yes, you want to like practice and rehearse it so things flow and you don't have to search for words in the moment, but you also don't want to be so rigid that it's like, I have to stick to the script and then this doesn't really fit when I'm talking to this person, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it really comes down to just like being human and realizing like I'm not a robot. The person I'm talking to is not a robot also. So let's just be humans together and have an authentic conversation. So that's kind of why I have some of the things on the screen.
Kara, can I interrupt for 1 second?
Absolutely.
Sorry, I think you said something really important there. You said, I'm not a robot. I'm not speaking to a robot. In the whole interview process, like 93% of companies screen through AI. So it is a robot reading that cover letter. It is a robot reading your resume. So I think where I'm getting tripped up, and this is really good for me, is like, you know, I hired someone to do my resume and I've got all the keywords and I'm getting calls back, all that stuff, but do they really get who I am? Even in my cover letter, like it's got every word, you know, on the, you know, in their job description on my resume to get a callback. But you're right. I think I'm missing some of the authenticity. Like, who am I? I'm very different than all those words. So I think this is very helpful. So thank you for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think that's a really important thing because, yeah, with, you know, the popularity of AI and that just being more and more integrated into everything, like that's just a reality and that's going to happen. So I think it is important to be able to, you know, tailor our materials and things like that so that we're ready for that. And at some point, we're going to have to engage at a human level, right? So I think that's why it's like, okay, yeah, I can be prepared for that. So if it's, you know, I'm submitting my resume and my materials through an electronic system, I need to make sure that it's, you know, targeted for keywords and all of that good stuff. And that's all fine and good. But at some point, and even the interview might be more like electronic at the beginning. But again, at some point, like you're going to have to engage in real life. And so it's like, how can I back up those things with my authentic self, right? So, and I think infusing your materials with some of this stuff. So if you're clear on some of your interests, your skills, your values, and can infuse that into your materials too, and it's also a way to start targeting employers and opportunities that are more in line with that, right? Rather than trying to fit into some box of like, well, this is what I've always done and this is what I need to look for. But maybe it's kind of flipping it on its head. And it's like, okay, how can I find, employers and opportunities that align with more of my authentic self? And then it's not like you're having to work so hard to fit into something, but because you're naturally selecting the things that are already aligned with that. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
So I have these up here. So I just wanted to give you all just a couple minutes to, if you have something to write with and just want to jot down your responses to some of these questions, I'll give you a minute or two. And this is something, again, I'll share the slides and there's that worksheet in the chat at the bottom, kind of related to elevator pitch with some of these, but just want to give you just a moment or two to start reflecting on some of these things. So I'm just
But as Kara
pause.
said, she is going to, her slide deck, she is going to provide to Don, and then we are going to be sharing that with everyone after the fact. So just so everyone knows. Yeah.
Yeah. And I just want to emphasize, and the reason I kind of do this and I'm pausing, I'm asking lots of questions and I'm pausing to give space for some of this is because I feel like we're all inundated with information, right? And we have the internet and we can find information easily, but a lot of times we don't actually take action on the information that we have. And it's just like, oh, I'm not ready. Or I'll just keep learning. I'll keep, reviewing information, obtaining information. And then we get into like analysis paralysis. So I think it's important to actually do something, right? So even if it's just responding to a couple of these prompts, just to force yourself to actually take action and do something instead of just like, okay, I'll do this later. And then are you really going to do it later? I don't know. I hope you do, but have an opportunity to do it right now. You can continue as I'm going through to jot down some thoughts that come up for you around some of these things. And then as you're kind of reflecting on this, right, also then start thinking about like a next level of this is not only reflecting on and responding to some of these questions, but then thinking of actual examples from your life where you've actually demonstrated those things, right? So if I say something motivates or inspires me, where's the time in my life where that I've shown that, right? Or that's shown up for me? Or, what am I frequently complimented or praised for? Okay, what's an example where that's actually happened? Like, how do you know that's true? Probably because it happened at some point. So just, jotting down like a moment, it doesn't matter when it's from, but just when did that happen for you? So just start brainstorming some things. So really, and the whole point of this conversation today is around storytelling and telling your authentic story, and that's the most important part because we can tell stories all day long, but we want to make sure that they're authentic to us and our experience and not just like sharing stuff because we feel like it's what other people want to hear. So, I have the quote up there, be yourself, everyone else is already taken, right? That's, basic, but true. So you need to show up as yourself. And, I think, how many of you have heard that phrase, facts tell, stories sell? Has anyone heard that?
Yes.
Yeah. And it's very true, right? Like if you think about it, if you just read a description of something, right, that's just kind of like a bunch of words and facts, is that super compelling? Whereas if someone tells you a story about something, you're probably going to connect with that more because brand is all about storytelling because people relate to and they remember stories, right? They connect with stories because that connects us to other people. Story does. Facts do not, right? Like it's just like if you get in an argument with your uncle at Thanksgiving over politics, right? You could share all the facts in the world about your side of that, your opinion, but it's not probably going to convince that other person to change their mind, right? Because it's just like facts and they have their deeply held beliefs. But if you are, more skilled at storytelling, then that is just a way better way to connect with people. And you want to get really good at that in your job search, right? And the easiest way to do that is to be transparent about who you are. So again, not trying to be who you think they want you to be, because that's not going to last anyway, but being really transparent about who you are, how do you approach situations, why do you make the choices that you make? And just really thinking about like, okay, well, what parts of my story would employers or customers or clients appreciate hearing about, right? Or what could you share that would help them know you more, like you more, trust you more? So really just kind of asking yourself those questions. And resumes, cover letters, personal statements, interviewing, elevator pitches, all those things are just versions of storytelling. Written versions, verbal versions, but they're all about storytelling. So I'm sure, sorry, go ahead.
Stories blend in some feels with the facts. That's the power of them.
Absolutely. That's what you want to do, right? Is even though, some people might want to believe that they're, not emotional or they're very logical. And some people might, be more of that than others, but really like we're all humans and we all have emotions, and that is what we connect with people, right? So bringing a little bit of that into your job search process is really critical in terms of humanizing yourself and being able to connect on a whole other level, rather than just being able to say like, well, here's my experience, here's how I can do the job. But it's like, okay, it needs to go deeper than that. So I'm sure probably a lot of you have heard about like STAR, CAR, PAR, CARL, those methods for like resume writing and interview preparation. Are you all familiar with that, or some sort of formula or version?
Yes.
Yes.
Some of you might be, some of you might not be, and that's okay. And the point of today is not to really go into like detail on this, but it's interesting because a lot of times, I get asked by clients, how do I stand out as an applicant? And when you're submitting resumes and cover letters and, application materials online, it can be really hard to stand out. Or how often do you feel like you hit submit on an application and then it feels like your stuff just goes into a black hole, never to be seen again? Does anyone feel that way?
I feel
Yes.
that way all
Yep.
the time. Often.
Yeah, it sucks. It sucks.
It does.
So I think, the best way to stand out beyond networking, which is, of course, you all know that is the way to actually, make some headway in your job search. But beyond that, you still have to have materials, right? You still need to have that side of things. And the best way to stand out in terms of that is to be specific. And a lot of people that I talk to, either when I introduce a concept like STAR or CARL or whatever it is, they might be familiar with it, they might not. But even when people are familiar with it, they have trouble executing it. Does anyone else feel that way? Like, oh yeah, I've heard of this before, I know what it is, I still struggle.
I feel it that way. This is June.
Yeah, what's hard about it?
The hard part is whenever I interview, I should have given them a succinct story because, I know that story, people relate to stories. But it's so easy for like, probably because, my previous life, I was an engineer. So I'm a very logical person. I still tend to list fact instead of tell them a short story. So that's one area. This actually, the STAR method is something I'm going to continue to work on.
Yeah, because it seems really simple and straightforward, right? But in practice, it's much more difficult.
In June, I have the opposite effect. I'm a storyteller, so I tend to tell too much. So I've got to edit my story and make sure I hit the key points.
Other thoughts on the process?
I feel like it's very time consuming. It's like we're supposed to be somewhat submitting resumes and cover letters and, tailor everything to the job description, which is like, why are job descriptions like 500
long.
words
100
long?
pages
But, like,
long.
yeah, like those, whatever, anyway. But yeah, I just feel like it's so time consuming to do all of that. And I don't
It
know.
is.
Yeah.
Yeah. Any other thoughts that are coming up for people or struggles?
I think it's important just to practice it.
Yep.
I find it in an interview situation where I'm being asked a question where I feel like I've given a good answer. At the same time, I feel like it's not as succinct as this, like I've kind of gone off the beaten path and did I really answer the question?
Yeah.
So I think just practicing some of those answers in this format prior and then just getting more skilled at it in the moment.
Yeah, that
Or that's-
practice is
yeah.
huge.
That's what I've done. I've written them down with the star and my exact things. And like, you kind of cater their question to something that you already have prepared in your head. Like, how can you make it fit in some cases, but like, so that you stay on track. But I think writing it down and practicing is huge.
Yeah, I think, a lot of times, and this is where people get stuck, right? Is because it's like, oh, okay, yeah, this seems simple. Like I can do this, and then like don't actually practice doing it, right? And then in the moment, it's like, oh, well, how can I think of these stories on the spot? Well, the goal is not to think of the stories on the spot, right? Is to think about them ahead of time and practice saying them, not so you sound like a robot, but because you don't want to be searching for words or how you want to say it, because you might think, logically in your head, yeah, I know what I want to talk about, but if you haven't practiced it, does it come out the way you think it's going to in your head? Never, right? And then you end up and you're like, what did I just say? What happened there? Like, so practice is huge. But yeah, a lot of times when I introduce this to people, I'll hear things, whether this is for like formulating bullet points on a resume or whether it's for preparing for an interview, it's like, this is going to make my resume too long. Aren't my bullet points supposed to be short? I feel like I'm bragging or I'm exaggerating my experience. It's way easier just to list what I did, like my job duties. That's way easier. I did a ton of stuff in this role, so I'll just do a general summary. So how many of you have had those thoughts when it comes to like your resume and like, oh, this is like way too much, like,
especially with the resume, because all of the coaching for resumes are results. Put in your resume what the results were that you got, and not to tell the story behind it.
Yes.
But remember that a resume is about getting you the interview. It's not about getting you the job.
Correct.
It's about getting you the interview. So, I had never heard about STAR, or sometimes I've seen it as START. When I had to do a higher view electronic interview. And I don't have words for how much I can say that sucked. But, but there's a good thing that came out of getting ready for that, which is I went out online and I researched like higher view. Okay. And there's stuff out there that'll be like, there's plenty of people on the internet for free who will tell you, if you can answer these 10 questions, you be prepared with these 10 questions for a higher view interview, you'll have it nailed, right? And I had 7 questions and 3 of them were on that list that I had practiced for. But practicing for all those questions and writing down my STAR story really helped me get back in touch with what I have to offer, with what my experience really is, and really kind of refresh my memory from 25 years of experience. And really get back in touch with how exciting that was to deliver those results.
Yeah.
And
well, and
to be more
I don't know
impassioned about it. It was
yeah.
very
And
helpful.
how many of us like just poo-poo our results or what we were doing, or we don't even remember or don't even acknowledge that we had results in certain experiences. Like I hear that a lot from clients, like, well, this was a really basic job. Like there weren't really any results, or I didn't accomplish anything. Right. And so I think it's really about a lot of those statements. What's really behind them is fear and self-doubt, right? It's a confidence thing. So it's less about like not being able to write the bullet point, but it's like, oh, I don't really believe this is like worthy of even saying, right?
That's a great point. The other thing is too, I think you don't always think about updating your resume. I was at Bloomingdale's 19 years, I think, before I had to update it, and you forget all the great things that you did over those 19 years. So, you know, I look back at my first resumes and I remember things that I did. It's good to have like progressive resumes too, because they start getting shorter and shorter because like your new job pushes out some things down the bottom. But if you keep those versions over time, you have a whole history of everything that you've done. So just as a regular practice now, I've done that.
Yeah, that's great. You know, that's great, is just to have that working resume, and whenever you start a new role or whatever, just continue to add to it so it's current and you're remembering it in the moment instead of having to like think back like, oh, what did I do 15 years ago? I don't remember, you know, and that can be hard to, you know, get in the practice of, but I think if you can remember to do that. But yeah, so like when I hear that, like, because this is like, and I'm just using a barista role as an example because this is one where people might say, I was just a barista. Like there was nothing like spectacular about this job. I didn't do anything important. I didn't, you know, there were no results. But you can do that with anything, right? And so it's really just a matter of like going that like deeper level. It's like, okay, yeah, like I know you like made coffee, but you don't need to tell me that in a bullet point because I know what a barista does, right? So it's again, it goes back to that like facts tell, stories sell. So you need to think more deeply about like, okay, well, what was I bringing to this role that was different than somebody else that has that exact same job? Because not every barista does the job the same way, right? Like people bring different things to it. So it's really thinking about how did I contribute specifically and then working through that. And yes, it does take some work, but once you initially do that and get your descriptions, you know, to a place where you feel good about them on your resume, then you don't have to like completely redo it every time you're applying for something, right? You might tweak some language here and there, but you don't have to completely reinvent the wheel when you're applying for something else, right? You might just change some keywords so that it aligns more with the job that you're applying for. But again, like if your basic description is there, great. So it'll probably be painful in the moment, but once you get it there, it's going to feel really good. So if you all want, there's an opportunity on that worksheet in the chat. There's a sample job description on that second page, and it purposely doesn't have a job title attached to it because it's really just to start breaking it down into really basic pieces. So the goal is to kind of look through that job description and identify the skills that the employer is seeking, and then think about when have I used those skills before, right, in any experience, and then just pick an experience that you want to talk about and practice writing out some bullet points using STAR or whatever formula you want to use, right? There's various different ones, but I think it's what's most important is the what, the how, and the why, right? Are you answering those questions? Like the what is not as important as the why and the how, right? Because the how is where we describe skills and where we can translate it to the, you know, the skills from the job description. And then the why is like, all right, the result, like, why was I doing this? So I think sometimes people have trouble coming up with, I don't know what the result was. If you ask yourself, well, why was I doing this task? Sometimes that can help. And also not thinking about a result as it has to be this huge accomplishment, like, oh, and then I saved the world and I raised $1 million, right? That's a great result, but most of our results are not that huge, but it could just be something that you learned, or, you know, how you improved a process in a, you know, slight way. So it doesn't have to be something major, but just think about like, well, why was I doing this in the first place? Because most jobs, most tasks, we're not doing it just for the heck of it, but we're doing it to accomplish something. So just ask yourself that. And then with interviews, you know, same thing. So, and my goal with this is not to like, you know, go through STAR in every situation in detail, right? But it's more of just kind of thinking about STAR as it's not designed to force you into this rigid framework. It's designed to help you, because we kind of talked about, right? Usually people fall into one of two ends of the spectrum, like either, oh, I'm just too succinct when I'm talking about myself in an interview, like I'm nervous and I just want to like get it done and over with, and I end up not saying much about myself. Or I like to talk a lot and I go off on tangents and then I get lost in my story. And by the end of it, I'm like, I'm not even sure if I answered the question. I don't remember what the question was, right? So I think it's just more of like, okay, well, if I can prepare in advance for the types of questions I might get, and that's where the job description helps, right? Is, okay, they're telling you in the job description, this is what we want. So how can I formulate possible questions they might ask based on that? Like if they're looking for someone with good communication skills, probably going to ask me a question around my communication skills in the interview, right? So that's how we can kind of prepare ahead of time. Let's go through the job description, highlight what they're looking for in terms of the skills, and then practice coming up with stories where I've demonstrated that particular skill. So again, on that worksheet that's in the chat, you can use that to practice, like writing it out first, like choosing one skill from that job description where you've used that skill at some point in some experience, and then just practice writing out a description of a story where you demonstrated that skill. And it does not matter where that example comes from. Great if it's related to the job, but even if it's not, as long as it demonstrates the skill, that's what matters, right? And this is what makes it authentic, because you're not making up a story, but it's an actual experience that happened to you, right? And you navigated that experience. So that is what makes it authentic. And STAR is just a framework to help you be organized about how you're telling your story, right? So I think if you have resistance around using it, because I do, sometimes people are like, this feels too rigid, or it feels, just like, I don't know, it just doesn't feel like something I want to do. But think of it as like it's designed to help you, right? It's not designed to force you into something specific, but it's just like, hey, are you touching on these things? Great. Then that's all it's for. And then in terms of elevator pitch, I just, so how many of you have ever heard of the company Marine Layer? Has anyone heard of it? So they're basically, their whole spiel is they make really soft t-shirts. So, but in terms of like an elevator pitch, like on their website, they have this description. And to me, this is like their elevator pitch. And I just really like it because it helps me kind of like, it's very relatable, it's casual, it's authentic. And it makes me think like, hey, these people seem kind of cool. Like I might want to buy a shirt from these people because I like what they're about. And they're not just saying like, I mean, we can buy t-shirts from lots of places, right? So it's not like, oh, this is like the best t-shirt in the world. But again, I might want to buy a t-shirt from them because of their story and because some of the things that they're about, like sustainability. So I think thinking about those things in terms of your own elevator pitch and just like, how do I want to be remembered? How do I want people to perceive me? Because it's, again, it's not trying to be a chameleon and, fit into some framework that other people want you to fit into, but like, okay, if I do run into somebody at an event or in a networking group or a meetup group or whatever, like, what do I want to share about myself that's meaningful and authentic and will really communicate who I am as a person, and not just like, here's my checklist of, skills or whatever, because people don't relate to that. But it's, again, like, who do I want people to see, who's the real me, and what do I want them to know about me if I only have this, little chunk of time. So
isn't this
yeah.
a little too long though, this one? Because I thought it had to be really succinct or you would lose someone.
I guess I think about it as like, and I'm all about like I just don't like rigid rules, like it needs to be this long or it needs to be this short or whatever. I mean, and if that is helpful for you, and I think so much of it just depends on the context of the situation anyway, but really I would prefer it being a little bit longer if it's authentic and meaningful and shares what I want to share than something short and succinct, but I'm not really communicating anything of value. So, and I'm not saying it necessarily has to be either or, but I'm just all about like flexibility with this stuff. So yeah, if it's something like this and you're like, that feels too long, okay, cool. Like edit it in a way that feels good to you, but you just want to make sure that you're able to communicate what's important to you. Yeah. Denise, were you going to say something?
No, I was going to add to that too. I think you're right. It depends on the situation. Like a lot of you are in very, yeah, I don't know what the word is, like where something short is more important than something elaborate. I come from retail. This is a great story. I loved it. But, you know, I don't know if someone in finance is going to find this that interesting. So it depends on what your audience, who your audience is.
Yes, and that is a really important point, right? Like you need to not only know yourself, but you need to know your audience, right? Because like Denise was saying, like, oh yeah, I am in retail. This makes sense. I love this. But yeah, if somebody is, you know, in IT or something, they might be like, I don't get it. Like whatever, I don't know, right? And that's making an assumption. But again, yeah, know your industry, kind of gauge it, feel it out, because it's not going to be the same across the board. So, and I would trust that, you know, whatever your industry is, you would understand that to a degree, you know, better than someone else would that's not in that industry. So I trust that you could tailor it in a way that makes sense for you. But yeah, and I think sometimes people really have a hard time, like those questions that I posed at the beginning. Sometimes people are like, these are hard. I haven't really spent any time contemplating these things. I don't really know. So in that case, sometimes it's helpful to ask other people for feedback if you're kind of trying to get a sense of your brand and what it is and how other people perceive you. Then maybe start there and reach out to some people, you know, people that know you well and that you trust to give you good feedback. But just reach out, send them a message and ask them, hey, what would you say are my 3 best qualities or my greatest strengths? And, you know, it doesn't have to be anything super lengthy, right? But just like, yeah, just shoot me a quick email response back or text them, whatever. You know, if that's a helpful place to start, I think that can be really powerful to kind of get it going. And once you start to get responses from people, you'll probably start to notice themes or common threads between what people are saying, what they notice your strengths are, your best qualities. So then that can help you kind of start to define your brand, or at least what it is right now. And then you can kind of ask yourself, like, is this what I thought it was? Is it what I want it to be? And do I need to make any edits or changes to like what I'm doing if like how I'm being perceived is not in alignment with how I want to be perceived? So I think, you know, it's a good exercise for that to kind of see, do I see myself the same way other people see me? And if you're not sure how to do that and how to ask people for that, this is just an example like template you could use. If this does not feel authentic to you or comfortable, that's cool. You can do it however you want to do it. But I do think asking others for feedback can be really powerful as a way to start, especially if you're struggling with how to do it for yourself.
I'm so glad you have this page because, you know, I think we all go through, well, I'm projecting, but through this whole process, you go through imposter syndrome and you had these really big jobs and you're like, oh my God, was I really that good? And you start to question yourself and you'll have periods of like highs and lows and you have to just let yourself feel what you feel. And 2 days ago, for the first time, I was talking to a girlfriend that I worked with, honest to God, 30 years ago. And she just was like, she gave me an earful of like who I was. And it was so good to hear. And I was like, wow, I'd forgotten that. And that was someone that worked with me 30 years ago. And it was just like, it's really important to like maintain friendships, and your friends are your network and your family's your network. And sometimes your family, you say, oh, you just say that because you love me. But like people that you worked with, those are the best advocates for who you are. And it's really important to remember that and write it down. So I love this.
Yeah. And would you ever have like thought of that or remembered that or described yourself in that way? Probably not, right? So that's why I think it can be a great place to start. So I know we're at time, so I want to be respectful of that. And this is my information. If you have like follow-up questions or just want to connect and chat, I'm happy to do that. I'm also happy to stay on today if you want to talk more or have questions, and then I'll share the presentation afterwards as well.
Okay, cool. Well, yeah, as I mentioned earlier, we're gonna, at least myself, and I don't know if Hari's gonna be able to stay, or Don sent me a chat saying that he was having some internet connection issues. But as I mentioned, I'm gonna hang on. We can do more deeper networking. But yeah, I really wanted to thank Kara for her fantastic presentation and her time today. Again, nominally our meeting does end at 10:30, so we're going to kind of pull things to a close. Any final, well, Kara, thank you for agreeing to hang on so we can, continue on, but like nominally, then we're going to pull the meeting to a close. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.